America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you when I come to you, and I've been away for a while because this is the season of kids' track meets and soccer games, and I was just busy doing other things. Plus, I'm writing my own stuff. But I do want to come to you this week and talk about the baby scoop era. It's a fascinating era in American history, and actually Anglo-American history in the world. Insofar as between the 40s and 1970, pretty much when abortion became legal in the United States, at the mid-70s, it was unbecoming for a certain class of person to be pregnant. And so you had social workers and the church and parents and everything pressuring girls to give up their baby into adoption, right? Apparently this worked especially well among the whites, but black people didn't fall for it so much. So that was the same time during the 40s, and actually even starting before that there was kind of sterilization campaigns for black women. White women, they were just trying to get them to give their kids up for adoption. And there were always stories of ready families who were willing to take on a baby that was not planned, an unplanned pregnancy. Because once you have Planned Parenthood, you have what do you do with unplanned parenthood. Now, me, I'm not a big fan of adoption. I see it as a second best solution, but one that shouldn't be one that shouldn't distract from our business. Should be to figure out a way so that parents can raise their children, so the children need not know why their parent had to give them up, or wonder who their parent is. And I just think that we underestimate the importance of trying to figure out a public policy so that parents can raise their children. I'm a little bit less skeptical of in-family adoptions with uncles and nieces, uncles and aunts and grandparents. Although even with those, there's still a whole half of the family that needs to be accounted for. So it's still a non-ideal situation, and it should be treated like a non-ideal situation. And we should actually give policies towards making sure that people, whether planned or unplanned, have the resources to raise their kids well. And so kids aren't punished for circumstances that are beyond their agency and control. But plus, I think we have a lot of stories about how competent adopted families are. When I'm old enough that I know adopted families, and old enough to know a bigger cross section of kids who were adopted, and it's not a rosy picture that you're sold in propaganda, right? So why were we sold this propaganda? I have a theory that during that era, and there's a book called The Girls Who Went Away that has a series of interviews with women who were pressured during that era, during the 40s and 70s, to give up their kid for adoption. And these are all white middle class women who were successfully pressured into surrendering their kid to a non-family member, and each interview in a different way, but not on purpose, relative to the interview. I don't think the interviewer set out to make a book about race and gender and the intersection. Said that this wasn't something middle class white girls were allowed to do. Have kids was something that middle class white parents weren't allowed to do. The kid had to be disappeared. Whereas apparently in every other community, they just worked out a solution. There was a solution without disappearing the kid. They worked out a solution either within the family, or like a parent took care of the kid themselves. But it wasn't that you were giving up the kid for adoption. And it wasn't just the Catholics who were pushing this. It was just mainstream Protestant America also, white America, because, and this is my contribution to the discourse, it seems pretty clear that having an unplanned pregnancy, or when you're unmarried, for the white middle class was an indictment of their civilization, was an indictment of their gender purity, which was an indictment of their whiteness, which is why the argument for those women to give up their kids worked so much more successfully for those women than it did for black women, Latino women. Like nobody else was giving up their kids for adoption in that way. surrendering it for adoption because it was unseemly. I mean, it was never ideal, but these girls, like black women and Latino women and non-white women, were not just doing it so easily. And through these interviews, you see the parents pressuring their kids to, pressuring their daughters to give up the good for adoption. And social workers pressuring these kids to give up these teenagers and people in their young 20s to give up their kids for adoption. And it was all to maintain reputation as a good white girl. Because, and this is a contribution that you know, if you really want the book on how gender and race work out for the purpose of colonialism and white supremacy broadly, you got to read Tommy Curry's The Man Not. Right. But this was all to kind of trumpet the purity of white womanhood so that they could be the perfect victims for, you know, black people and black men in particular, so that then you can criminalize all black men. But you can only criminalize black men if you have like the perfect victim, and a bunch of white ladies, white girls getting pregnant before they're married in their teens does not the perfect victim make. So we needed a kind of white femininity that was pure and innocent and was inconsistent with actually becoming pregnant. So those babies were just disappeared when it turned out that, like, you know, white girls were having kids and sex and everything just like everybody else. But it needed to be disappeared as a non-factor in the way that it didn't need to be disappeared as a non-factor in other communities, because their racial identity was tied towards doing things the right way, and being innocent and pure, right? So during that era, these kids just had, it was 500,000 kids. 500,000 kids during that era between the 1940 end of World War II and the mid-70s were given up for non-family adoption. The book is called The Girls Who Went Away. And it's all about this class of people. Nobody talks about them. People interview adopted families. People interview the adopted kids. Nobody goes to find the birth mother and get the horrible story about how they were pressured by their own parents and society and these social workers to sign their rights away to their kid in a really gross fashion. Some, like all manners of church, all pressured these girls to sign away their rights to their kids. Like, there are some adopted kids who then end up having problems. And I just can't, it would break my heart to give up my kid for adoption and then find out 20 years later that kid's still a screw up. Like, if we're going to screw it up, I'd like to screw it up myself. And not just let some other other person screw it up. But it's a fascinating era just because it was before abortion, but after kind of a loosening of sexual mores. And it was the solution that made wealthy white people happy. It was a solution because they got to have babies on demand. It was a solution that middle class and lower middle class white people accepted because it allowed them to have the same sort of class status or racial status as wealthy white people, insofar as we are the people who do not have unplanned, unwedded pregnancies. Like, that was the white identity. And what did you do with the people who did have unwedded, unplanned pregnancies? Well, you had to disappear them. Right? So you hear all of these stories about white girls kind of disappearing to go stay with their aunts or whatever, to have the baby, then come back, have the baby, give the baby up for adoption, then like mysteriously come back. And those are only white people. You don't hear stories about black people having to run away to have a baby to come back, because it's understood that it's one of those things that happens sometimes. It doesn't need to be hidden in the same way because it wasn't tied to our identity in the same way. So I think there's a fascinating asymmetry that is gendered insofar as white women had to be a certain way in order for whiteness to be what it was as a civilization marker. And so that's what pressured, keeping up that appearance of purity is what pressured all these girls to just surrender their kids. And it was pushed by their white parents too. It was, and you read these interviews and these moms are awful. If my daughters came to me and said, well, I'm pregnant, I would want to know who the father was, but I'd work out a solution that kept the kid in the family, and I just take care of it myself. It's not like the idea that we would surrender our kid to a stranger is ridiculous. I take care of it, or like me and my wife would take care of it. My kid would go on to college or whatever, and then when she came back from college, she would have a 10-year-old. It's a non-ideal situation, but the fact that it seems to call to give your kid up to a stranger is a historically peculiar solution. It needs to be treated as a historically peculiar solution. And there are other ways. Well, first of all, we just need to actually make it easier for people who have kids to raise their kids. But also, we need to think about why there was so much pressure to keep up the appearance of purity. And who really wins in that. And why, once again, it asymmetrically worked on whites but didn't work on the blacks. So the book on this, I think that is actually pretty good, is The Girls Who Went Away. And then there's another one, but if you read one, you'll find the other one. And it talks about that these girls were pressured to keep up an appearance that was deeply classed and deeply racialized. And the people who weren't trying to keep up that appearance in that way actually get to keep their babies. And so that's a little bit the more you know. Oh, by the way, if you appreciate what I'm doing, and my kids have camps this summer, paying for a lot of camps. They have my girls are doing flag football, soccer camps and music camps, and we're just paying for a lot of camps, and I need money to do that. And if you appreciate the wisdom I'm giving to you, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, $50. I'll keep the regular shows are coming back. I just needed to take a little bit of hiatus to tie up some loose ends on my end. But go to www.funkyacademic.com and I'll keep trying to help you not be a horrible parent and, sustain good relationships and be a better friend and all that stuff, and give you the quality of wisdom that you might not get on mainstream media or anyplace else. So once again, the book I was talking about that concerns the baby scoop era is The Girls Who Went Away. And it is just a series of interviews by these women who were pressured by social services, their own parents, the religious leaders, and the culture to surrender their baby up, to sign on a line. I just can't imagine how that would be a good idea. Sign on the line and surrender your kid to some stranger and now that we're old enough to know these people, were not particularly competent parents. We all tell ourselves stories that adopted parents or parents who adopt are so much more competent than their birth parents would be. And that's just not the case. A lot of these people who adopt are looking for emotional support animals, and they treat their kids like, support animals. And here's the thing about adopted parents. You can't tell them they're doing a bad job because, in their mind, everyone should be grateful that they're doing this hard thing and raising a kid that's not their own, even if they're kind of half doing it, even if they're half raising a kid that's not their own. And sometimes they don't even treat the kid that they adopted as well as they treat the kids that they birthed. So that's a whole thing too. And we're just not honest about it because we're too busy trying to be grateful for the people who adopted. It's kind of like someone volunteers to work for you and then they do a bad job at time. You have a hard time firing volunteers. You should be grateful that they volunteered their time to begin with. Well, we get that problem with adopted parents all the time. They're not very good at it, and they assume that we should be grateful that they are doing it to begin with. Anyway, thank you for your time, and read about this era, the baby scoop era from the 40s to the 70s. There's there's an analogy to be drawn between the people who are forced to surrender their babies, and then the kids of my era, 25 years ago, who were pressured into taking student loans that maybe they shouldn't have taken. It's the same sort of social pressure that leads to monumental decisions that we haven't really reckoned with. That we really haven't reckoned with. All right. So thank you for your time. I will talk to you at a different time. Peace.